True Grit. No, not that one. This one. Joel and Ethan Coen's 2010 adaptation of the acclaimed novel featuring action, adventure, and kicking children off porches. True Grit is told subjectively. It's Maddie's story. Through a myriad of cinematic tools and techniques that establish subjectivity in a biblical metaphor, True Grit explores intimately the moral arc of its main character. The opening sequence deftly establishes the context in which the viewer is to understand the film, and does so with cinematic tools such as production design, mise-en-scène, and sound. And the first thing established is the biblical nature, a theme of godliness. The film opens with Proverbs 28:1, and it's quite significant in that it's a biblical representation of Maddie's driving motive to bring her father's runaway killer to justice. The text then fades and leaves the viewer with a black screen. But then comes a light that slowly builds in intensity and presence. The lighting and editing interact to evoke a sense of holiness, of divine light breaking through the darkness. And the Coens really hit the nail on the head with their use of non-diegetic sound. That song is called Leaning on the Everlasting Arms, a 19th century hymn about the omnipresence of God's love and support in times of turmoil. But sound also contributes the other key facet of this sequence, the voiceover.
People do not give it credence that a young girl could leave home and go off in the wintertime to avenge her father's blood, but it did happen. I was just 14 years of age when a coward by the name of Tom Chaney shot my father down and robbed him of his life and his horse and 2 California gold pieces that he carried in his trouser band.
The viewer is introduced to the story by Maddie Ross, albeit older and recounting the past, establishing her perspective as the lens through which the story is conveyed. Now listen to this last line of the monologue.
There is nothing free except the grace of God.
This line ties it all together, referencing both Maddie's biblically sourced conviction to deliver justice and the everlasting love of God from the music. This establishes an inextricable link between Maddie's perspective and this biblical context. And Maddie's perspective is reiterated throughout the first act of the film through a bunch of subjective shots that chip away at the sense of voyeurism so typical of the cinema. Like this POV shot here. Pause this POV shot. What light through yonder window breaks? Light that reconjures the sense of God's light and its reach. Which brings us back to a Maddie voiceover, a letter to her mother in anticipation of her journey into the unsettled West in pursuit of justice.
Though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I shall fear no evil.
The Coens' use of mise-en-scène juxtaposes the dark room to the bright red of the apples, highlighting a seemingly trivial set piece. But in the context of the voiceover, it evokes a sense that Maddie may soon be compromised by this evil, as she stashes the forbidden fruit of temptation into her sack. And our hunch seems to be correct as she heads off into the Wild West, a place of lawlessness where Maddie's morality will be thoroughly tested. And the Coens seem to portray the backcountry as a place of not just lawlessness, but godlessness. Indeed, Maddie's experience of it begins with a scene alluding to pagan mythology. She comes to a river that separates the settled territory from the unsettled and finds a ferryman dressed in black with unkept facial hair, pocked cheeks, and glaring eyes. This set and costume design bring to mind the river Styx, the body of water leading to the Greco-Roman underworld traversable only by a ferry captained by Charon, who's described in all those ways previously listed about this guy. And this ferryman refuses to take Maddie across the river, just as Charon refused Hercules. Maddie has to make a decision whether to go back or to cross the river into the unsettled West. Through a series of tight, subjective shots, the viewer is pulled into this conflict. We even see a POV of her looking back in temptation, the wide shot emphasizing a separation between the sides of land, an otherness between these two worlds. But like Hercules, she overpowers the ferryman and crosses the river. Looking at the production design and mise-en-scène employed to portray the unsettled West, it really does seem like Hades' realm of the dead, a pagan place devoid of God. And through subjective cinematography, the viewer is thrust into Maddie's almost hellish experience as we see the seeming omnipresence of death through her point of view, including dead trees, dead people, POVs of dead trees, POVs of dead people in dead trees, POVs from Maddie in a dead tree watching dead people fall into dead grass and leaves, POVs of live people making each other dead, Oh, what fun! Hey, at least she still has her horse. Oh, man. And we feel all of this death hardening her, as it hardens us as we're exposed to it non-stop. The costume design also evokes a sense of hellish godlessness, as Maddie runs into the almost theriomorphic inhabitants of this unsettled land, like a bear man. The leader of an outlaw gang with very woolly legs that make him look like a satyr, whose pagan pants and hoof-like boot are literally in Maddie's face and ours in this tight subjective shot. And a man who communicates exclusively through animal sound but doesn't have any symbolic costume design. And eventually she finds herself holding her runaway MacGuffin at gunpoint. Non-diegetic, triumphant music plays to reflect her feeling of glory. He's unarmed, stands up to her command, and she righteously brings him... Uh-oh. And with that shot, the music comes to a jarring halt as Maddie loses her footing and tumbles into a cave. Many cinematic tools are employed here to convey the moral fall of Maddie. There's no music, just the diegetic sound of the cave as we see a shot that harkens back to the light of God motif. Juxtaposing the light above and the darkness she is in shows just how far she's fallen. All this combined with a subjective shot brings us into the bleak helplessness of her situation. Making it even more visceral are the cuts between POV shots of a dead body and her anguished face. And then 2 more POV face alternations as she stares at Satan's favorite animal in the dead body, suggesting the serpents inside of the other guy who fell in here. And by extension, her. Horrific non-diegetic music begins as the serpents creep towards her.
Mr. LaBeef! Mr. LaBeef!
There's also the diegetic sound of the snakes rattling and hissing, evoking a sense of imminent moral and physical peril, like the serpents are coming for her very soul. And the snakes bite her trigger hand, which is later amputated in accordance with Matthew 5:30. If your right hand causes you to stumble, cut it off and throw it away. It is better for you to lose one part of your body than for the whole body to go into hell. She gets saved and is rushed back to civilization. It cuts between a tight, shaky close-up that gives the impression of riding on the horse with her, and a POV of riding past the dead around her, as we see them fading into the back, moving past them. And over this is leaning on the everlasting arms, as heard in the opening, to represent God's everlasting love. This all serves to engage the viewer deep into Maddie's sense of relief, that she's riding back into God's light, back towards redemption, which is really notable in the production design of this shot, with her riding out of a shadow cast over a barren valley filled with bodies. Wait a sec.
Though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I shall fear no evil.
Ah, so that's what they were doing. But she's riding out of the shadow towards something we've not seen since she crossed the river. A swath of living trees, which are clearly separated from the shadow by this light peeking over the hills. Along the way out of the backcountry, we feel again a sense that Maddie's journey has come full circle, as we see her take in the light of the sun breaking the darkness. We feel her connection to it. It hasn't been severed. She can still find redemption. Which she does, as I so lovingly spoiled earlier. The Coen brothers' deft use of various cinematic tools establishes a sense of subjectivity and a biblical context that makes True Grit a truly intimate exploration of Maddie's moral journey.